done any introducing before. I'm understandably very, very nervous about doing this. I've heard terrible stories about people making mistakes in introductions. I remember hearing about the gentleman who was introducing a very well-known speaker, well known that apparently was to everybody except the person introducing him. And he said, "We're very pleased to have as our guest speaker here tonight, Mr. Smith." And Mr. Smith is a partner in Smith Brothers. We're very, very grateful to have this very successful businessman here. Last year, Mr. Smith was responsible for his company making $20 million in cattle in Texas. And so we can please welcome Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith got up and said, "I know it's very poor form to contradict the introducer, but in the interest of accuracy, I must do that." It was not $20 million, it was $100 million. And it was not in cattle, it was in oil. And it was not in Texas, it was in Oklahoma. And it was not me, it was my brother. And he didn't make $100 million, he lost it. So he almost got it right. Well, I think I can get it right about Jill. I think most people would agree, who know Jill all over the world, that probably the wisest thing she ever did was marry me. I heartily agree with that. We met in the context of youth ministries. I was a banker at the time, but in all my spare time, I was engaged in ministry with young people. And I used to go to a place called Keynote in the north of England and help with the young people there. And on one occasion, there was a very pretty, tall, slim blonde there who was working very hard with a rather rambunctious group of incorrigible kids. And I felt that she needed help. At least that was my line. And I went and offered to help her with these young people, and so we got married. Well, I don't have a lot of time, and I have to compress this story. But I recognized right away that Jill was somebody who had arrived at the conclusion that I had arrived at independently, and it was this, that we both agreed, if ever we were to marry anybody, and neither of us was looking for a partner at the time, but if we were to marry anybody, we were going to develop that relationship and any family that might come out of that relationship on one very simple principle. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. It was going to be a family fundamentally based on an ethos of service. That was who we were, that was how we would start. And that, I would have to say, is how Jill and I have continued in the last 54 years together. It has been a family life predicated on service, and it's been a great ride. Jill has, during that time, raised 3 children. I was, I'm afraid, an absentee father because I was called to an international evangelistic ministry. One thing is abundantly clear to most people, and it is this: if you're going to be an international evangelist, you can't be at home. And we, of course, were subjected to a lot of criticism because I was gone so much. But the children didn't suffer at that time, because Jill did a remarkable job of being mother and father for a period of 11 years, when, of course, we realized that was quite long enough for the children, and so we made some dramatic changes. And she then morphed into a pastor's wife, which was really very, very funny, because she had absolutely no knowledge of what a pastor's wife should do. She had grown up in a family where she was completely unchurched. She was not converted in church, she was converted in the hospital. She was not nurtured in a church, she was nurtured as a student at Cambridge. She had no experience of seeing Christian families operate. She hadn't been brought up in a practicing Christian family. And all of a sudden, she is a pastor's wife. And she rolled up her sleeves and dived into that task and did a phenomenal job. And the sort of thing that she did and continues to do is this: she saw what needed to be done and didn't say something ought to be done. That's not Jill. She said something needs to be done about this. I'm going to do it. Come and join me. And so the first thing she did was notice that there was no work for junior high kids, so she started on junior high kids. Then she noticed there was no ministry for women, so she started a women's ministry. Then she noticed that there was no fine arts ministry in the church, so she started a fine arts ministry. And then some publishers came along and suggested she should write some books, so she wrote some books. And if you look back at the ministry we had together in Ambrook Church in Brookfield, Wisconsin, I would have to say that Jill put in 30 solid years in that ministry, never took a penny for it, and was as good as any two pastors on the staff. I'd like to introduce to you somebody whom I admire greatly as a servant of Jesus, Jill Pauline Briscoe. You owe me.
That's amazing. First time I've been asked to introduce Stuart was last night. First time he's ever been asked to introduce me was tonight. Thank you, darling. That was overwhelming.